Well, so I came across this earlier on the Scottish Government's website. Yet another example of some of the sort of egregious topics that are being snuck into Scottish academia, unbeknownst to the vast majority of the public at large, all in the name of social justice and inclusivity and progressivism, you know. All this talk of Nicola Sturgeon and the legacy that she's allegedly left since she stepped down from her podium for the last time, the SNP's legacy in general, how they're the party for Scotland. I don't recall at any point the public being consulted in some of the things that are being shoehorned into academia. I don't recall any of these SNP politicians during election campaigns campaigning for these things to be implemented. No, there just seems to be some sort of political consensus that the inclusion of said subjects is a given. And quite frankly, I think more eyes need to be on some of the stuff that's included within our so-called education system at this point, because, as I said, it's pretty damn egregious. So this is from December the 13th, 2022. Education, achieving excellence and equity. It's never equality, it's always equity. National Improvement Framework and Improvement Plan for 2023, setting out the vision and priorities for Scottish education that have been agreed across the system and the national improvement activity that needs to be undertaken to help deliver those key priorities, right? So there's over 100 plus pages in this PDF. I'm not going to go through the entirety of it. I'm going to try and do my best to just showcase the few things that I think stick out above the rest. Some of the things in this document are pretty questionable, but I don't want to make a long video rambling on. But that said, improving the education and life chances of our children and young people is an ambition which is shared across the education system, and it remains central to our improvement agenda. This is the foreword from Shirley Ann Somerville, the feminist bulldog for the SNP, right? Off to a great start. Tackling inequity is at the heart of the government's education reform agenda, and there is a collective responsibility to ensure continuous improvement for children and young people. The national discussion on Scottish education should lead to a consensual vision on the purpose of education and will help to inform Professor Hayward's independent review on qualifications and assessments. The report, in March 2023, will pave the way for future reform to the qualification and assessment system in Scotland to ensure our qualifications and assessment approach meet the needs of learners and society in the 21st century. It is crucial that we listen to children and young people and respond to their expectations and their lived experience. We already know, and it's always interesting to pay attention to how these things are always worded, This ties into children's rights, etc. They're politicizing children, then they ask for their opinions on said matters. The children inevitably provide them with premeditated responses or suggestions, and then the SNP will take those responses that they would never have conjured up by themselves had they not been politicized to begin with. They will take these responses and roll with it. So it looks as if the children are making these demands. They're turning them into politicized activists, change makers, agents of change, etc. So it says we already know that they want, right? They want to see more concerted action on how our education system addresses racism, climate change, children's rights, gender inequality, and LGBT rights. So how would children, we're talking about children and young people, right? So school kids. How the fuck, pardon my French, would school kids come to conclusions that are predicated on requiring more being done to address racism and climate change and the UN CRC / children's rights, or quote unquote gender inequality, or the LGBT? Isn't it strange that all of the progressive political talking points are now being parroted by children, and we're supposed to think this is natural and organic in nature, right? Nah, it's pretty odious. The reality of the matter is, as I said, is this premeditation, because children, in order to come to these conclusions, must have been presented with these topics prior. Yes. So then we have a summarisation of some of our local improvement plans, with the first one being placing the human rights and needs of every child and young person at the centre of education. Right? UNCRC, of course. Red herring. All local authorities highlighted areas in their plans which demonstrated a commitment to placing the human rights and needs of every child and young person at the centre of education, with the majority making specific reference to developing youth, voice and engagement strategies, policy development, partnership working, and providing professional learning in order to raise awareness and support staff development in this area. A few local authorities also reported that quality improvement processes were being revised in order to evaluate progress towards the implementation of the UNCRC. These reflect that the underlying principles of learning for sustainability are being embedded in local authority improvement plans. Every facet of society is becoming more and more entangled with all things sustainable. This is the SNP's legacy. That's all they're good for, realistically. So they also go on to say that local authorities' examples relating to the NIF drivers of improvement include undertaking a review of service-wide policies to ensure the United Nations Children's Rights Charter principles are considered, ensuring all staff have access to appropriate resources and professional learning associated with the Children's Rights Charter. It's just, and then it goes on to say, improvement in children and young people's health and well-being. And then they go on to mention the majority of local authorities also indicated that the health and well-being census and other data will be used to inform improvement planning priorities. And it was only just a few weeks ago that Nicola Sturgeon stood at a podium to talk about babble as per usual, and she was questioned about a school that had recently presented, or schools in a local district, Aberdeenshire, I believe, Aberdeen Council, recently unveiled the health and wellbeing sex census, effectively, as it was called, to schools, and she feigned ignorance. You know, it's Scottish government policy, but yet she tried to pass it back to the council itself. Yes, councils have the choice of whether or not they wish to implement these census to the schools in their constituency. But for a time, the council in question was Tory ran. When the Tories lost their control over said council at the previous local election, it was overtaken and replaced by SNP, of course, I'm pretty sure. And hey presto, it was then unveiled again. Anyway, it goes on to say as well that they want to develop a parental engagement strategy in partnership with CLD, including a nurture support group for parents of very young children and supporting early years establishments to identify and implement evidence-based emotional literacy programs, right? Some local authorities also outlined approaches to engage with parents or develop opportunities for family learning in order to support improvements in literacy and numeracy. In a few local authorities, specific focus was mentioned in relation to the use of digital technology, outdoor learning, interdisciplinary learning, learning for sustainability, and effective use of support staff. Local authority examples relating to the drivers of improvement included implementing reading strategies to promote the importance of reading with families, promoting progressive interdisciplinary outdoor learning experiences with a focus on the sustainable development goals. So again, we're talking about children here. And yet, irrespective of their age, whether it's early learning, whether it's primary school, whether they're in high school and considered young people at that point, the Sustainable Development Goal regime is not far behind them. It's fucking everywhere. This is the SNP's legacy. In a section titled Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equality, I found this paragraph quite interesting, as it says Scotland's needs-led and rights-based educational system, so they get to hide behind the facade of the UNCRC because they're obsessed with human rights. The UNCRC has to be taken seriously and placed on a pedestal, aka that's how they can get away with coining terms such as rights-based. However, rights-based educational system is designed to be an inclusive one for all children and young people. Children's rights and entitlements are fundamental to Scotland's approach to inclusive education, supported by the legislative framework and key policy drivers, including the Curriculum for Excellence, Getting It Right for Every Child, the Equality Act and additional support for learning legislation, and the professional standards for Scotland's teachers, which is effectively the law of the land for teachers in Scotland. They all must adhere to the rules that are conjured up by the aforementioned, and of course that's where you get BS such as promoting social justice, as it mentions just below, where it says these are underpinned by a set of values aligned to social justice and a commitment to inclusive education. So social justice is one of the many things that are taught in our schools now. Education seems to centre around it. Why? Because of the professional standards for Scotland's teachers, and of course, learning for sustainability, and it's their rights according to the UNCRC. Scotland is set to become the first country in the UK to directly incorporate the UN CRC into domestic law. We already use this as a framework to ensure that we consider children's rights whenever we take decisions and to help provide every child with a good start in life and safe, healthy, and a happy childhoods. Then that's swiftly followed on by learning for sustainability. You know, all learners have an entitlement to learning for sustainability, a cross curricular approach that weaves together distinct but closely related themes of sustainable development education, climate education, global citizenship, children's rights, and outdoor learning. So just let that sink in. This is the sort of BS that our children are being taught in Scottish fucking schools right now as we speak. Providing every learner with their entitlement to learning for sustainability is key to ensure that they gain the knowledge, skills, and values and attributes needed for life in the 21st century. An understanding of their environment, culture, and heritage, their role in the local, national, and global community, the importance of connection and care to the natural world, and the significance of their choices now and in the future to live in a sustainable way. Totally not brainwashing. And here's another example of premeditation coming into effect, where it says here that children and young people have repeatedly asked us to put learning for sustainability at the centre of their learning experiences, calling for a greater emphasis on climate education, biodiversity, and youth participation. So they present all these materials, they present all of these ideas and these concepts to children, and eventually these children will start to make suggestions and they're encouraged to do so because they have a right to be listened to and taken seriously, etc., etc. And their voice matters, their opinions matter. So essentially, they come to conclusions that were premeditated and then they run with it. So you teach children all about climate change, you teach the children all about learning for sustainability and all that that encompasses. You teach them all about youth participation and the requirement for there to be more of. Then inevitably they start to call for more to be done to teach climate education everywhere. More to be done to emphasise the need for more youth participation. Things that they would never have conceived had they not been taught to think it. And then it goes on to say this is clearly articulated in Professor Ken Moore's report, Putting Learners at the Centre Towards a Vision for Scottish Education, where Professor Muir highlighted that the current generation of learners sees climate change and social justice as key drivers influencing the future of our education system. Now, I wonder where these children that were questioned for Mr. Ken Moore's report came to these conclusions. I wonder where they got the information to come to these conclusions. The government has been working with children, young people, and their educators to strengthen the Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, ensuring their views are taken forward and that learning for sustainability is better embedded across the curriculum. So the children have demanded that this is done, and the government are happy to oblige. Again, premeditation. This effectively is the SNP's fucking legacy. Pardon my French. The government is also working with Education Scotland to develop the Learning for Sustainability Professional Learning Directory, where educators will be able to access training and resources that will support them to embed learning for sustainability better in their practice. So more and more and more resources are provided to teachers to ensure that they continue down the little path to becoming more and more politicised themselves. Because the more politicised the teachers are, the better chances are that the classroom will become rife with the toxicity that fucking punctured their brains. Since January of 2022, 145 new head teachers have joined the Excellence in Headship programme, going through the 2-day induction. The ongoing professional learning sessions for head teachers continues to be shaped by the participants. New sessions included input from past participants of the leadership program, detailing how their work on the inquiry in the program shaped their practice. Popular sessions from previous years continued into 2022, including socially just leadership, anti-racism, allyship, and action. So just think about that, albeit the number for the time being is relatively small. 145 new head teachers. So this is head teachers that are attending these events, attending these web seminars, etc., in order to obtain more resources and, broaden their church of their worldview, etc. Right? And they're adopting talking points, and they're being introduced to concepts such as socially just leadership and anti-racism. Hence, then they then take what they've been instructed to do or what they've taken on board, and they start to implement that same BS in their own schools. As it says here, the second cohort of Excellence in Headship Stretch was launched in September of 2022, with 56 experienced head teachers engaging in collaborative inquiries to explore, analyse, and suggest improvements to aspects of the education system in Scotland. Whoopie-doo. So, evidence shared from teaching in a diverse Scotland, increasing and retaining minority ethnic teachers 3 years on, progress and final report, or the REREP programme, as it's more commonly known nowadays, or it's part of anyway, board, they identified racial literacy. So the Scottish Government's Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme identified racial literacy, which is critical race theory, and confidence as a key area of development for the teaching and education workforce. Work has begun to address this with the development and delivery of Education Scotland's Building Racial Literacy programme, which is critical race theory, Scottish Government funded critical race theory, where they talk about privilege and unconscious bias and whiteness theory, white fragility, etc., etc., etc. The Building Racial Literacy programme was co-designed by Education Scotland officials, representatives from the education sector, and anti-racist experts with lived experience, critical race theorists like Melina, like Hajida Mohammed, like Nizutu Tamani, to name, well, they're the main three, but there's a lot more of them at this point. Navan Govinder is another one that springs to mind. The programme is open to anyone in the education sector, including leaders and local authorities and early years staff. Early years staff. And we already know that there is some early years teachers that have participated in this programme. So irrespective of whether or not a child or children are in early years settings, which is nursery, primary school settings, high school settings, or colleges, etc., building racial literacy is slowly seeping into their classrooms. And building racial literacy is critical race theory, which comes explicitly from Education Scotland and the Scottish Government, as they're one and the same. And the Scottish Government funded this fucking programme. These people sit on Scottish Government panels with the sole intention to reform Scottish academia. The aim, according to them, is to ensure that educators, teachers, are racially literate as opposed to being race evasive, because according to them, being race evasive, right, colourblind societies, treating everybody equally irrespective of what colour they are, that's problematic. Their words, not mine. Racially literate, of course, is redefining words in order to present a narrative that will have you believe that systemic racism exists, structural racism exists, disparities are because of racism, there's not enough brown and black teachers in Scotland because of racism, everything is racism. They redefine words, and until you learn the definitions of their redefined words, you are racially illiterate. So critical race theory is masquerading itself as anti-racism, and it's been shoehorned into Scottish academia unbeknownst to the vast majority of the public. And it says as well, they're able to approach a range of situations with confidence, including dealing with racism, define it, and racist incidents. With the initial cohort engaged with the programme at the beginning of 2022, and by January of 2023, 250 individuals will have participated. Sustainability is embedded in that some of the first cohort are now engaged in facilitating current sessions and producing anti-racist material to use in them. Sustainability. We're then presented with a case study. This time it's Angela Kerrs. There's quite a few of these case studies dotted around this PDF. And she's an acting head teacher at Cartmill Family Centre in East Renfrewshire Council. Angela completed the Building Racial Literacy programme in March of 2022 and has since been involved in learning, also delivered by the professional learning and leadership team at Education Scotland around designing, leading and delivering effective professional learning with others. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to be nominated as the Early Learning and Childcare Representative for East Renfrewshire Council to join the first cohort of Building Racial Literacy, critical race theory. When I read the pre-course information, I honestly wondered what I would get from the course as a white middle-class leader. As part of the Building Racial Literacy course, it was really important to start with ourselves and locate where our beliefs, views, and attitudes had formed before we could begin to go on the journey of influencing change. And what do they mean by influencing change? Well, when they're literate in their racial endeavours, they then in turn turn to the children in question under their care and promote this BS to children. It's in fucking black and white. I don't know how more self-explanatory it needs to get at this point. This is poison. Absolute poison. I feel that I am very much at the early stages of developing racial literacy and will have many questions needing answered over the next months and years as I probe and dig deeper into my journey. Critical race theory has helped me connect with other practitioners throughout Scotland. Having a network of these so-called professionals to continue to bounce ideas, question and share resources and advice with is invaluable as we work through our action plans to lead anti-racist change. She then says that she is proud that as a Building Racial Literacy alumna, the impact can be seen in our school improvement plan. In our early learning and childcare centre, we are working to gather more data on our families to be more inclusive, to tap into the diverse knowledge and cultures that might exist in order to be more reflective and culturally responsive in our practice. No longer race evasive, I now lead anti-racist change from a position, where courageous conversations about equality are welcomed. Early learning and childcare centre, building racial literacy. Yeah. Another example of premeditation. In 2023, the government will consider the recommendations from the co-design phase of the Learning Participation project with a commitment to launch a new co-created learning participation mechanism that protects and promotes children's rights by embedding the voice of children and young people into education, policy development and decision making. So when the kids inevitably come to conclusions that they would never have come to had they not been presented with the information prior, when they start to make demands and suggestions for change, the government will implement it because their voices matter. Yeah. Professor Muir's report highlighted that the current generation of learners see climate change as one of the most significant issues facing their futures. The COP26 young people called at COP26, young people called for a greater emphasis on climate education, learning for sustainability, biodiversity, and youth participation. So again, premeditation. Children are being introduced to concepts such as learning for sustainability, youth participation, UNCRC, global citizenship, etc., etc., etc. They inevitably start to make suggestions for change going forward, and it's all taken into consideration. But the point is, these are all concepts, subject matters that they're being introduced to in order for them to inevitably come to these conclusions. Had they not been introduced, these conclusions would never have been conjured up in the first place. It's premeditation, it's political indoctrination, clear cut. Agenda 2030, education, learning for sustainability, where a Sustainable Development Goal 4.7 explicitly talks about education and the need to promote all this BS. This is the SNP's legacy. And it says here as well that there is still variation in the quality of learning that children and young people receive. A new refreshed Learning for Sustainability Action Plan will be published in March next month. This has been developed in collaboration with children, young people and their teachers, and the Learning for Sustainability Leadership Group, right? So children, young people, and their teachers are part of a wider group to conjure up policies and suggestions, etc., that's all going to link in to a refreshed Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, which of course will have all the aforementioned in mind in terms of what needs to be incorporated going forward. It's just, wow. And then it says as well that the group will work on the development and delivery of the refreshed action plan and will monitor its implementation for the development of a new key performance indicator system. So again, something I said near the start of this video, at what point was this ever sort of discussed publicly? At what point was this a campaign pledge at a podium in the run up to an election? At what point was there a national discussion on these topics? The SNP are doing that bidding of UNESCO on the United Nations, etc. And they're implementing this BS as if it has to be done, as if it's imperative, as if it's moral, as if it's correct, when in reality, all this is nothing short of indoctrination. This is all political concepts that are being shoehorned into schools, and we're led to believe that it's for the betterment of the children and their well-being, etc. Yeah. In order to address the issues of race inequality in schools and develop a systemic anti-racist approach, Scottish Government, in partnership with Education Scotland and Equality Unit colleagues, have recently established a race equality and anti-racism in education programme to tackle a number of areas which contribute to the barriers which perpetuate race inequality in education. The Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme was established in February of 2021 after 3 months of official and ministerial consultation with race and education stakeholders, right? Post George Floyd, effectively. The aim engaging with stakeholders in this way was to enable ministers and officials to gain a clear understanding of the barriers which perpetuate race inequality, which is disparities, right? They use the term inequality because it makes it sound good, but they're referring to disparities. That's all this is. And racism, define it, in schools and the impact they have on learners and staff. Begin to develop with stakeholders new and innovative ways in which these barriers can be addressed in order to develop improved outcomes, operative word being outcomes, for children, young people, and practitioners, if they're BAME. As a result of the programme, of stakeholder engagement and subsequent distillation of the discussions which took place during that period, 4 key themes emerged, which stakeholders, critical race theorists, agreed were interlinked and of fundamental importance in order to tackle race inequality in schools. Education and leadership in professional learning, diversity in the teaching profession and education workforce, curriculum reform, racism and racist incidents in schools. A set of 20 actions to embed critical race theory in schools was developed and signed off by the Cabinet Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, SNP's fucking legacy, eh? In September, COSLA and ADES committed to supporting the actions, some of which are already underway. An evaluation framework is currently being developed by an external consultant in order that the impact of the actions can be measured. The framework will be completed in early 2023. You can find out more about the work of the REREC program on the Race Equality and Anti-Racism Education Program information page. Well, don't need to do that, as I've done it 1,000 times before. This year's National Improvement Framework demonstrates our long-term commitment to a collaborative approach to improving Scotland's education system. New initiatives build on earlier ones, learning from what works and what teachers, schools and young people tell us they need. What young people tell us they need. Yeah, politicised children, what do they tell you they need? Our vision of excellence and equity is a shared endeavour, with parents, including local authorities, early years practitioners, parents and carers, teachers, lecturers and care services playing pivotal roles in improving outcomes for children and young people. This collaborative approach will help to ensure that Scottish education remains a world-class, which improves the needs and voices of children and young people at the heart of education. It says here that they're in the process of establishing a gender equality task force in education and learning, as recommended by the First Minister's National Advisory Committee for Women and Girls. Right? Their anticipated outcomes and next steps say here that the ultimate outcome from the task force will be a strategy which embeds gender equality in education and learning, resulting in girls and young women having a gender equal experience in early years, which is nursery, gender-friendly nurseries. These are already concepts that exist. School and community learning settings, tying into the ambitions already set out in Equally Safe and the Gender Pay Gap Action Plan, and will dovetail with strategic ambitions being taken forward. In terms of next steps, the task force has identified 3 strategic themes under which the 20 recommendations made by the collective will be taken forward. 3 working groups are in the process of being formed to drive progress, reporting to the core task force and Shirley Ann Somerville. Teaching in a Diverse Scotland identified that more needed to be done to encourage and support leadership opportunities for BAMEs and to provide current and future school leaders with professional learning focused on anti-racist practice. As a result, Education Scotland will include case studies on BAME teachers who have participated in the professional learning and leadership programmes, in evaluation activity and promotional materials. Right? So they say here, and I noticed just above, there was they've already completed this task with reference to Part A. 2 case studies have now been developed. One was published in 2022 and the other was published in the Building Racial Literacy Group Critical Race Theory. This is a closed program area for participants. Yes, you can't access it unless you're part of the program. Next steps for this action, Education Scotland are now linking with the National Lead for Diversity at the General Teaching Council of Scotland to consider how we utilise our networks to support their priorities. We will continue with the qualities, diversities and inclusion monitoring engagement of our programmes. Sessions on culturally responsive pedagogy are now a standard aspect of excellence and headship. Oh, bold and progressive and brave. By December of 2022, and this PDF came out in December of 2022, Education Scotland will build on its existing professional learning and leadership suite of programmes supporting empowerment and agency. Since January of 2022, Education Scotland has built on its existing suite of professional learning and leadership programmes and engaged with over 10,000 practitioners during this period. The extension of our PLL work continued and saw the introduction of the Critical Race Theory programme, otherwise known as Building Racial Literacy, which was co-constructed with a wide range of partners, including education practitioners and stakeholders, critical race theorists, of course, but hey-ho, on the Scottish Government's Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme. It's just repulsive, absolutely repulsive. Look at this, right? So the programme has practitioners from early learning and childcare, teachers in schools and practitioners from community learning and development settings, learning from and working with each other, taking an inquiry approach to improve their practice and impacting positively on the learners they directly support. Participants in the Building Racial Literacy programme came from a wide range of education settings, including early learning and childcare settings, nursery, schools, local authorities, and initial teaching education. All these new additions to the suite of programmes have allowed us to broaden our reach and impact of learning across education. Wow. Jesus Christ. So, just see what outcomes and next steps. Anticipated outcomes and next steps for the Education Leadership Programme are the building of cross-sectoral networks and a large number of practitioners engaging in reflection and making improvement to their practice that improve outcomes for the children and young people with whom they work. Next steps are to deliver and evaluate the new Educator Leadership Programme. The expected outcomes of the Building Racial Literacy programme are to make anti-racism, critical race theory, a baseline value for participants and make educators less race evasive. From the 2022 end of programme evaluations, 100% of programme participants now feel confident in dealing with a racist incident in their workplace, along with 100% able to identify with confidence aspects of their critical race theorist practice that they need to improve. Next steps are to deliver cohorts 2 and 3 in 2023 and continue to evaluate impacts. Yes. Scottish Government and Education Scotland will work with a range of education agencies, children and young people, organisations and wider stakeholders to review the curriculum framework in relation to children's rights and in relation to race equality, anti-racism reporting to the Curriculum and Assessment Board and Scottish ministers. The anticipated outcomes and next steps. The next stage in this work will be to bring together the respective approaches and proposals for children's rights, race equality and anti-racism, and a further strand on LGBT education into an integrated, coherent package of curriculum reform, which can be taken forward in the context of education reform. Recommendations on next steps are likely to go to the next meeting of the Curriculum and Assessment Board in early 2023. And it'll be UNCRC compliance. The Race Equality and Anti-Racism Curriculum Reform Subgroup have developed a series of recommendations and created draft principles for an anti-racist curriculum, in which they said exclusively, before they wiped it from their page, but I have it in videos to prove that they did so, they explicitly said that the curriculum reform would be based around the concept of it being viewed through a critical race theorist framework. So, anyway, this video is going on far too long now, but my point is effectively premeditation in many respects, introduce children to all these political concepts, blow smoke up their arse, metaphorically speaking, with the promotion of the UNCRC. It's their right to be listened to and taken seriously. It's their right to learn their rights. It's their right to learn all about global citizenship, learning for sustainability, and all of that encompasses. Teachers are instructed to do so, and they effectively have to do so because of the um, professional teaching standards and the General Teaching Council of Scotland's instructions, right? And it all comes directly from Education Scotland. And who the fuck is responsible for that? The SNP. The SNP's legacy. This is the sort of nonsense that children are being taught now in schools, more and more and more commonly so, and it's all under the guise of curriculum reform. That is the SNP's fucking legacy.